great order came to Ukrainian army. Kiev ordered the clearing of both the eastern and southern fronts. Troops of Ukrainian army entered Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Numerous artillery units and rocket units attacked one after another. It was announced that Russia lost 122 soldiers in Luhansk. Russian troops began to withdraw from many residential areas. New systems are being sent to the eastern and southern fronts. Shipments will support Ukrainian army without slowing down. Simultaneously, Ukrainian forces began to attack the Zaporizhia region. With the withdrawal of Russia to the right bank of the river, the Ukrainian forces began to attack. At the same time, operations began. The defeat of Russian soldiers in the Melitopol region enabled them to reach the Dnipro River comfortably and quickly. According to the statements of experts, new volunteers came to Kiev. It is expected that approximately 600,000 volunteer soldiers will arrive in Ukraine by February. With the arrival of new volunteers in Kiev, the victory campaign will begin on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, experienced Ukrainian soldiers began operations to break through the Russian defense lines in Luhansk. New soldiers will join the army to gain control and advance in the region. Also, a different unit of Ukrainian forces attacked the Russian army from a different area. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian ground forces conducted an extensive operation in the Spit area. Clashes continued for hours. It is known that as a result of the clashes, 20 Russian soldiers were neutralized and 11 Russian soldiers surrendered. When we look at the attacks of Ukraine, it is thought that the first target will be Kherson. After this process, major operations against Kherson could be started before the Eastern Front. The entire Kherson region was surrounded by the Ukrainian army. Russia, on the other hand, is trying to make shipments to the region from the Eastern Front and Russian territory. Therefore, both sides are constantly preparing. Russia failed to reach its goal on the Southern Front. Moscow wanted to turn Ukraine into a closed state by seizing its eastern and southern fronts. In other words, they wanted to cut off Ukraine's connection with foreign countries and Black Sea by taking control of two fronts. However, Russia's loss of power in the south in this process may cause Moscow to lose the war. Ukrainian army is simultaneously launching attacks on both the eastern and southern fronts. In addition, more and more aid continues to reach Kiev every day. In this process, China's decreasing relations with Russia will greatly affect the Moscow economy. He turned to SWIFT again to fix the Russian economy. As you know, the Russian ruble was removed from SWIFT after Putin ordered an attack on Ukraine. With the increased sanctions imposed, the Russian economy and currency became very worthless. This clearly affects Russia on the front line. I can say that Ukrainian army made much faster shipments to the southern and eastern fronts. The collapse of the Moscow economy severely limited new shipments to the front. Russia was aware of this before the war started. However, the Kremlin government and the Russian army fell into a great complacency. Kremlin government has said that Ukraine could be completely captured within 48 hours. But we have left behind the 8th month of the war. If the war between the two countries is prolonged, the country with a good economy is likely to win the war. In this process, the support sent to Ukraine ensured the successful advance of Ukrainian forces. The prolongation of the war with each passing day will cause more damage to Moscow. However, Russian President Putin did not give up his views on the negotiations. For this reason, Kiev, which is in an advantageous position, announced that it would not sit at the negotiating table. Putin wants Ukrainian army to surrender, for Russia to recognize the referendum, and for Crimea to be recognized as Russian territory. But as I mentioned, Ukrainian army is in a much more advantageous position and Russia is getting one step closer to defeat with each passing day. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Zelensky wants Russian troops to withdraw from Ukrainian territory. Kiev's only desire is for Russian army to return to its former borders. However, Zelensky made it clear that the negotiations would not start until his only condition was met. While the violence of the clashes increased on the southern front, Ukrainian army launched attacks on the Donetsk region with HIMARS systems. According to the statements, Ukrainian army carried out 14 HIMARS attacks in 2 hours. As a result of the attacks, 56 Russian soldiers were neutralized. In addition, many Russian-backed group members surrendered to Ukrainian army. After the attacks of HIMARS, Ukrainian artillery units attacked the Russian positions for 4 hours. Ukrainian armed forces did not show a clear interest as the fighting continued. Losses can be shared clearly in a few days. On the other hand, Russian troops in the region started a counterattack from the north of the Donetsk region, where the first attacks took place. Ukrainian armed forces repelled Russian attacks around Novoselivsk, Stelmakivka, Bilo-Horivka, Luhanskoye Oblasti in Donetsk Oblast, Bilo-Horivka, Kurdyumivka, Vadian, and Marinka. Ukrainian General Staff, Russian army carried out 4 missiles and 14 airstrikes in 24 hours. In addition, Russian troops carried out 60 rocket attacks. We did not suffer any loss of life as a result of the attacks. Almost all of the airstrikes were destroyed by our air defense systems. We have repelled all the attacks made in this process and we continue to move forward, he said. As the conflict continued to escalate, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg made important statements regarding the negotiations. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made a statement to the press after meeting with Dutch Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Wopke Hoekstra and Defense Minister Kajsa Ollongren. Stoltenberg stated that Russia's withdrawal of the defense line in Kherson to the left bank of the Dnipro River was a success for Ukraine on the ground and strengthened its strategy of continuing its support to Ukraine. Stating that Russian President Vladimir Putin made 2 major mistakes when ordering an attack on Ukraine, Stoltenberg said one of these strategic mistakes was to underestimate the courage and commitment of the Ukrainians to protect the country, and the other was to underestimate NATO's support. Although Russian armies have withdrawn from some areas, they still control a large area in Ukraine with a large army, Stoltenberg said, stating that Putin aims to keep Ukraine in a difficult situation due to winter conditions. Stoltenberg said, "We have winter ahead of us. Putin wants to freeze Ukraine." Stoltenberg said, "Most wars end at the table, but everything that happens at the table is about success on the ground." He said that as Ukrainian army wins the war, its hand in the negotiations will get stronger. Asked by members of the press that Ukraine had a good opportunity to sit at the table with Russia, Stoltenberg said, "Ukrainian people pay the price of the war. Therefore, Ukrainians should decide when and under what conditions to start negotiations." Stoltenberg, "We will support the conditions that Ukraine will accept. Our task is to increase Ukraine's earnings." It was also decided that Russia would pay war reparations. United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution asking Russia to pay war reparations to Ukraine. The 193-member United Nations General Assembly voted on the resolution demanding that Russia be held accountable for any violation of international law within or against Ukraine. In the process, as soon as the war is over, Russia will send money directly to Ukraine to restore Ukraine. Europe, NATO, and G20 countries say that with Russia's presence, the damage in Ukraine must be repaired. After the negotiations, the intensity of the war on the front increased considerably.